Every Nigerian must be instrumental to the growth and development of our nation through the use of innovative energy and idea to lead and initiate policies that will sustain the economy and enhance good governance. With all the financial turmoil facing the world, it has become pertinent for exchange of new ideas that will enhance good governance. Please subscribe to our channels, listen to our messages and engage with us. With your support, we can transform the lives of all Nigerians. Welcome to the Season 2 of the NESG Radio.
Hello there, welcome to the NESG podcast. My name is Oluwaseyi Vincent. Today we are going to be speaking on Nigeria's foreign trade in goods in 2021. With me are my amazing colleagues, Mr. Sodiq Olofi and Mr. Wasiu Adekunle. Would you like to say hello, guys?
Hello, guys. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be talking about Nigeria's foreign trade in goods in 2021. So one of the key things that we see is that external trade in goods rose in 2021. So it rose by more than 50% compared to 2020. And we also see an upward trend even in 2021. So going from about 7.9 trillion in the first quarter of 2021 to the fourth quarter of 2021, where it stood at 11.7 trillion naira. So we see quite a big increase. And relative to 2020, we see that the external trade has increased by about 58%. So it was at around 25.2 trillion in 2020, and now we have it at 39.8 trillion in 2021. So we see that there's a lot of economic activity going on both in Nigeria and abroad. So that has incited a lot of import and export activity. So, Mr. Sodiq, would you like to talk a bit more about what we see happening in our foreign trade activities?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, for me, it's a good and a bit of downside, like you said. We have a positive growth outcome in our trade. The trade outcome increased by over 50%, so it's also driven by about 51% in export and also about 64% in import. So the good side is that our trade is improving. Our export has improved significantly from what we have in 2020, driven by oil price and at the same time by other commodities that we export, especially raw materials. On the downside, we have the import. Well, it looks like a downside, but we breaking it down, you see some improvement in some of the numbers, especially we have the dominance of the importation of intermediate goods. While on the downside to that, we have expansion in the import of fuel and other mineral imports rather, which are byproduct of petroleum export or petroleum import. So those are just the dynamics we see around the import. However, it's a good news. Our export improved significantly, but we need to do more about our import, especially our fuel import.
Exactly, yes. So what we see is a widening trade deficit, so that's definitely concerning. So in 2019, we had a surplus of about 2.2 trillion naira, and we went into deficit in 2020 with a deficit of about 178.3 billion, and we also see that deficit also rising in 2021. So this is a bit of an issue for us. So just as Sodiq just mentioned, so we have imports rising. So although we have exports rising, which is a good thing for Nigeria, we also have that imports are also rising and outpacing exports. So this is something that we need to try to rectify, because ideally we want to make sure that we're not importing much more than we're exporting. So over to you, Mr. Wasiu. Okay. So would you like to speak a bit more about what we see in our foreign trade behavior?
Yeah, thank you very much. We could see that across the quarters, the 4 quarters of 2021, there is a consistent rise in the value of external trade, suggesting the fact that the impact of COVID-19 is waning. And then all this, there is the relaxation of lockdown restrictions across the world, and a pickup in economic activities actually drove the growth of external trade in 2021. So, as usual, if you look at the composition of our external trade, it's the sum of imports and exports. So, our imports accounted for over 50% of our total external trade. So, and by nature, if you look at it in 2019, we've been maintaining a kind of surplus, okay, until the Nigerian government had to implement this land border closure in the 4th quarter of 2020, so leading to, and that kick-started the deficit era. So, and here we are, even after the border has been opened, we're still in deficit, which is very unfortunate. Thank you.
Lovely. So let's talk a bit more about the different components of our external trade. So Sadiq has already talked a bit about oil exports. So let's just talk a bit more about both the export side and also the import side. So let's start off with the export side. So we have that both oil and non-oil exports have risen. So that's a good thing. So the economy isn't just focusing exclusively on exporting oil. However, oil exports accounted for 89% of total export earnings, relative to 11% for non-oil exports. So Sadiq, would you like to touch on this a bit more? Like, tell us a bit what you think is going on here with our export earnings.
Well, it's a good thing that export is expanding, and we hope to do more in coming years, in 2023 going forward. Fortunately for the recent event around Russia and Ukraine. But most importantly, we see that significant increase, over 50%. And we see it across all the categories of commodities we are exporting, from oil to manufacturing to raw material to agriculture. However, oil still remains the dominant export commodities that we have. We hope going forward we'll be able to reduce the dominance and expand and diversify our exports, so to say. So while on the non-oil exports, we have a significant increase over there too, particularly on the side of raw material exports, while the others are on a bit meager expansion. But the thing we see around there is that it shows that Nigeria is still primarily exporting raw material. Crude oil is also a raw material. It's just because it has a popularity around itself. So basically, Nigeria is still exporting raw material. Agriculture, we have very limited manufacturing export. So we'd like to advise that we work more to ensure that we are able to add value to what we are exporting, and at the same time, we are able to expand the exportation of other commodities.
Exactly, that's great. Yeah, so diversification is very, very important. So one of the things that drove the oil export earnings was the rise in the average crude oil price. So this went from about an average of $42.1 in 2020 to $71.1 in 2021. So this, helped create a buffer for us to be able to do a lot better in terms of oil export. So we could also think about what happens if, the price of oil didn't rise as much, or if it fell. That would have created, quite a tightening of Nigeria's fiscal space. So just like Mr. Sadiq was saying, there is a lot of scope for value addition, and something that we need to look into. So beyond, raw materials, agricultural products, we need to look into like light manufacturing, the things that Nigeria has comparative advantage in. Okay, so let's talk a bit about Nigeria's trading partners. So I'll go over to Mr. Wasiu. So would you like to just tell us a bit about the trading partners that we have, and maybe the kind of products that we tend to export, although we can probably guess what the answer to that is going to be?
Yeah, thank you very much. India has always been our largest export trading partner, and what we export to India basically is crude oil. So, but what is very intriguing is that this quarter, the last quarter, Q4 2021, so you found out that US has dropped off from the top 5. So it's now been replaced by Indonesia, countries like Indonesia. So basically, based on our export composition, crude oil accounts for over 80% of our export earnings. And this implies that, given the fact that India is the largest oil importer from Nigeria. So let me say India is Nigeria's largest export market. So we actually export more to India in terms of our crude oil exports. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Wasiu. Okay, so we've already talked about how imports have risen significantly. So they surged to about 20.8 trillion naira from 12.7 trillion in 2020. So we see quite a big increase in imports, which has generated an increase in our trade deficit. So we would like to now talk a bit more about what we see in Nigeria's imports. So one of the key things I think everyone knows is that we import mineral fuel. So this has risen between 2020 and 2021. And because of the increase in oil price that we saw in 2021, this also spilled over into the price of our mineral fuel, so leading to an increase in the import value of this item. So we also found that we imported significantly more machinery and transport equipment. Okay, so Mr. Sodiq, would you like to talk us through what we see in our import values?
Well, a lot of the numbers had already been said in the question. However, the major salient thing we see there is that our import in 2021 was largely driven by increase in the fuel and lubricant category of commodities that we import. And this also is associated with the increase in prices of food as we observed in the year. But I would like to do a bit of breakdown to see some of the things that maybe we can have a renewed understanding of what we have there. Having studied our import combination, we discovered that household consumption that comes as imports is just about 11.7% of our total import, while fuel and lubricant import constitute about 31% of our total import, which means while the other about 57% are in intermediate commodities that are going directly into production or goods and service production. So what this is telling us is that though it looks somehow, because of the nature of our exchange rate volatility, we have serious problems. So we need to be concerned about our import situation. However, the distribution is not really that bad, except for the component that is coming from the import of fuel and other lubricants. So if you remove that component, in 2021, the Nigeria imported 6.34 trillion of fuel material. That's finished product from petroleum or from crude oil. If Nigeria is able to facilitate a function or is able to get the refineries functioning such that many of these finished products that we're importing are not there, we discover that our trade, as it were in 2021, would have been in surplus of about 4.34 trillion. So by using this opportunity, that's a very big chunk of our trade, which is telling us that we need to do more about this oil production. It doesn't really sound well. As a country, you are producing, you are exporting trillions in crude oil, and at the same time, you are importing trillions in crude oil. So it speaks a lot about how our exchange rate is behaving and some of the things we can remove from that angle to be able to solve our exchange rate problem in the short to medium term.
Fantastic. Yeah, exactly. So just to speak a bit more to what you just said, so the value of other oil products, so imports of other oil products in 2021 was 123% higher than in 2020. So we see how this is definitely eating up a large chunk of what we spend on imports. So it's something that needs to be addressed so that we can get a bit more balance in our external trade. So over to you, Mr. Wasiu. So would you like to speak a bit more about what we see in our import figures, our trading partners, and maybe what Nigeria could do to improve its trade situation?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just like Sadiq has said the other time, that the problem is from our importation of refined petroleum products. So, and this speaks volume of the suboptimal production, local production of production capacity of our refineries. Nigeria, we have 4 refineries, but all 4 of them could only satisfy 20% of local demand, while the 80% are satisfied with imports. So the issue basically is that we should call a spade a spade. We know the right thing to do, and which is to fix our refineries. Like we know that this PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, is up to deregulate the upstream and downstream oil sector, and that's expected to also improve investment inflows. But, there is a need for a strong political will to implement those reforms. Just like we said, an increase in oil price translates to an increase in the price of refined products. So it's like there is a strong positive correlation. So, and it then implies that if government should continue the subsidy regime, which we are currently running, so aside from the gains from increase in oil price translating to increase in oil export earnings, where that gains will be offset by increase in the import bill on refined products and even from subsidy payments. Thank you.
Great, exactly. I think we've said it all with regards to what we need to do to try to get the import bill to come down a bit more. Okay, so now we want to talk a bit about the effect of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So particularly the ramifications for the oil price. So we've seen that there's been quite a sharp rise in the oil price over the last few months. So this is due to constricted supply of oil owing to sanctions on Russia. So, Mr. Sadiq, what do we think might happen over the next few months with regards to the effect this would have on the Nigerian economy?
Well, it's largely a political thing, so I may not want to dabble into the political aspect. But given it's maybe this is the first time we are having this kind of situation where oil price, whatever is happening in the world, Middle East, in the 80s we have the issue of the Middle East, led to increase in oil price. Nigeria really benefited from it. And so other crises that had happened that led to oil price. However, this situation is a bit different and a bit downside for Nigeria, given that Nigeria is not able to even meet the OPEC quota before we now talk of expanding production. So it's a bit on the low for us. However, I believe that is an opportunity for Nigeria to ensure to expand their productivity, drive investment into the oil and gas sector, and all of that. However, there are other channels that we could also be impacted, given that Nigeria also imports wheat. Nigeria also imports other minerals from other parts of the world which are currently being affected by the crisis. So it's not a one solution, fix it all of a thing. It depends on how the world leaders are able to resolve the issue as fast as possible, but we hope for the best.
Yes, exactly. So one would say like a rise in the oil price would expect it to benefit oil exporting countries such as Nigeria. But it's also a double-edged sword because we've already talked about how rising oil prices translates into a rise in the price of refined products which we import, and we also have the fuel subsidy regime which we have in Nigeria, and that would also have negative ramifications for the country because that would lead to a rise in landing costs, and then that would feed into the amount of subsidy which is paid out. So it's really difficult to say what the overall effect would be. And just as Mr. Sadiq also mentioned, Nigeria also imports from Russia and Ukraine. And, so the crisis in Russia and Ukraine is also affecting other countries which Nigeria imports from and exports to. So it's a bit of a complicated situation. So over to you, Mr. Wasi. Would you like to speak a bit more about what you think will be transpiring in Nigeria in terms of our foreign trade in the coming months?
Okay, thank you very much. Like we can say that oil also, we can always predict what happens. But I think Nigeria will gain more, by rallying oil prices. But from the other hand of it, there will also be an increase in import price of refined petrol. But there is one key thing which I think if our government is able to do will alter or reverse the current deficit is how do we promote non-oil exports? Because Nigeria, if you look at it, the non-oil sector contributes 90% to our GDP. But while oil, which is our main source of forex, contributes just less than 10%. So how can we harness the export potentials of the activities in the non-oil sector? Because there is a great and huge prospect for non-oil commodities, such that if you look at see the improvements that we had in 2021. So if that is leveraged upon, Nigeria would not only reduce its dependence on exporting raw materials, which we're going to plow in back. So we are going to add a lot of value to the product. They would also create more value, improve our terms of trade position. So because when you export finished manufacturing goods, then you have a command over high prices of those items. So there is need for massive private sector investment, so to wrap up production in these sectors. Thank you.
Great. Yes, that's fantastic. So I think, what we've been talking about is pretty clear. So we've been saying that, there is a need for us to try to improve our export position. And Mr. Wasiu has very nicely wrapped that up for us. So we need to look into the sectors which Nigeria has a comparative advantage in, and sectors which can add value, which will improve the price of our exports and reduce our dependence on exporting, agricultural products, raw materials, and oil, and help us to export more value-added products. So, Mr. Sodiq, do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation on some of the steps that we can take to improve our trade position?
Well, something that is always out there, I've been talking about diversification of the economy. Well, it is always argued that the economy is diversified, like my colleague said, 90%, over 90% in the non-oil sector, while the oil sector is doing 10%. But how do you say an economy is well diversified when contributions of each sectors of the economy to the macro economy is not diversified? Oil sector alone is responsible for close to 90% of our forex inflow. Oil exports, if not for the situation of low price that we had over the past 3, 4, 5 years, oil export used to be over 70% of government revenue, So we are saying that if we assume we are diversified in our economy, maybe we need to expand the scale of many of the sectors. We have many of them. People have been saying a lot about them. Although we need to recognize the improvement that we have seen across many of these sectors, but at the same time, we need to do more to ensure that these sectors contribute significantly to tax revenue, to foreign exchange revenue, to all of that. That's when we can genuinely say that we have truly diversified our economy. However, in the current state, it looks like a pseudo-diversification.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Mr. Sodiq. So just like you said, there are a lot of great benefits from diversifying the economy. So that would have positive effects on tax revenue, foreign exchange earnings. So that would help us to, create a buffer for a currency, for example, would help to make sure that companies that are trying to import raw materials and machinery have access to foreign exchange. It will help to improve the fiscal space of the government. So there are just so many great benefits that we see from improving Nigeria's trade position and also diversifying the economy in a way which will be beneficial for the nation. So yes, it's been great talking to my colleagues, Mr. Sodiq Olofin and Mr. Wasiu Adekunle. So we've been talking about Nigeria's foreign trade in goods for 2021. So we've looked at our trade balance. We've talked about imports and exports and the importance of diversifying the economy to have better national outcomes. So thank you very much, Mr. Sodiq Olofin and Mr. Wasiu Adekunle. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. For more information, visit www.nesgroup.org/podcast. So that's www.nesgroup.org/podcast. Thank you very much. My name is Oluwaseyi Vincent. Until next time.